This woman may look lonely, lost, or incomplete, but she's not what you think, because Jung saw something deeper, something most still refuse to admit. In today's world, we see more women living alone than ever before, and yet the image of a woman alone still carries a heavy shadow. People assume she's lonely, that something must be missing from her life. They imagine heartbreak, rejection, or failure. Some even believe she's too difficult, too cold, or too proud to share her life with someone else. But what if all of these ideas are wrong? What if they say more about our discomfort with female independence than about the woman herself? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, had a very different perspective. He believed that solitude wasn't a sign of failure. It was a powerful step in a person's journey toward becoming their true self. This process, which he called individuation, is about breaking away from the roles society forces on us and discovering who we are beneath the surface. It's not about escaping others. It's about facing ourselves. For Jung, women who live alone are often on this very path. They are not hiding from life. In fact, they are doing the exact opposite. They are stepping into the unknown, asking questions most people avoid. Who am I without a partner, without children, without anyone else to define me? This kind of honesty takes courage. It requires a woman to walk away from expectations that have shaped female identity for generations. Expectations like being a caregiver, a wife, or a support system for others. Jung believed that these roles, while not necessarily bad, could become masks, ways of avoiding the deeper, more difficult task of self-discovery. When a woman chooses solitude, she begins to remove those masks. She faces the silence of her own thoughts. She begins to confront what Jung called the shadow, the parts of herself she has ignored, denied, or hidden to fit in. This can be painful. Without distractions, old wounds rise to the surface, doubts, fears, desires. But in that discomfort lies transformation. Jung didn't see this process as easy or romantic. He saw it as necessary. In a culture that rewards fitting in, choosing to live alone as a woman becomes a quiet form of rebellion. Not rebellion for its own sake, but for the sake of truth. These women are not rejecting love. They are refusing to lose themselves in the search for it. In fact, many of them are learning to love themselves for the first time, not in a shallow or self-help way, but in a deep, steady way that doesn't depend on outside approval. Jung believed this kind of love, the love that comes after facing the shadow, is the only love strong enough to build something real with someone else. So the woman who lives alone may not be missing anything. She may have chosen something far more rare, the path to becoming whole. And that, Jung would say, is not weakness, that's power. If we keep misunderstanding women who live alone, we're not just making a social mistake, we're making a psychological one. When society looks at a woman living by herself and assumes she must be sad, broken, or waiting for something to begin, we miss what's really happening. And the cost of that misunderstanding is higher than we think. For one, we force women into roles they may not want or need. From a young age, girls are taught, often without words, that their value is tied to how much they care for others, that their real life begins when they become someone's wife, someone's mother. So when a woman decides to step outside that script, people don't know how to respond, they judge, they question, or worse, they pity her. And when that happens, women are pressured to return to old patterns, not because they want to, but because they're tired of being misunderstood. But the loss isn't just personal, it's cultural. When we ignore the truth of these women's choices, we block our own growth. We silence stories that could teach us something important about independence, identity, and inner strength. Jung believed that the human mind needs both masculine and feminine energies to become whole. If we only accept women when they are dependent, we never get to see the full expression of feminine power. It also damages how men relate to women. If a man only feels comfortable when a woman needs him, then her independence feels like a threat. Instead of seeing her as an equal, he may feel rejected or useless. This creates distance, confusion, and resentment on both sides. Jung warned about this. He believed that true connection only happens when both people meet as whole individuals, not as halves looking to be completed. When we label a woman's solitude as failure, we teach her to fear herself. We teach her to fear silence, freedom, and her own company. But the real danger isn't in being alone, it's in never learning how to be alone. So what's at stake? Everything. our relationships, our self-respect, and our ability to grow beyond old stories. If we can't see the woman who lives alone for who she really is, then we're not just failing her, we're failing ourselves. Because in her journey, there's a mirror, a chance to face our own fear of being alone. And maybe, if we're brave enough to discover what's waiting on the other side of that fear. Carl Jung believed that every person has a task in life, to become whole. He called this journey individuation. It means becoming the person you were always meant to be, not the person your parents, your culture, or your relationships want you to be, but the true self, hidden underneath all of that. For Jung, this was the most important work anyone could do. And for many women who live alone, this work begins the moment they choose solitude. Individuation doesn't happen when life is busy with noise, distractions, and people who expect you to act a certain way. It begins in silence, in stillness, in that space where a woman finally has time to ask the hard questions. Who am I without someone next to me? What do I believe truly? What have I been running from? Jung didn't see living alone as a sign of isolation. He saw it as a doorway. A woman living by herself often stands at the edge of deep change. She is no longer shaped by others. Instead, she begins shaping herself. This is not about being selfish. It's about taking full responsibility for who she is becoming. Jung also believed that inside every person is both masculine and feminine energy. He called them the animus and anima. The anima is the feminine part within men. The animus is the masculine part within women. These parts often remain hidden or stay undeveloped, especially when we rely too much on traditional roles. But when a woman lives alone, she is often pushed to develop her inner strength, her decision-making, her direction, all parts of the animus. At the same time, she begins to understand her own emotions, intuition, and sensitivity in deeper ways. She's not just becoming more independent, she's becoming more complete. This inner balance is rare. Most people never reach it because it takes time and courage. It means breaking old habits, challenging deep beliefs, and being willing to go through emotional discomfort. But Jung believed that individuation was the only real path to freedom. Not just outer freedom, but freedom from our own unconscious patterns. For a woman living alone, this journey isn't just about daily routines or managing a home by herself. It's about facing what she was never taught to face, her own inner world, the doubts, the dreams, the quiet truths that got buried under expectations. And slowly, through that process, something new begins to form. A self that is not shaped by the need to please, to impress, or to belong. A self that is real. So while the world may see her as just a woman living alone, Jung would see something else entirely. He would see a woman at the beginning of her deepest transformation. Not lost, not broken, but finally walking her own path. In Jung's view, we all carry powerful symbols deep inside our minds. He called them archetypes, universal patterns, that show up in dreams, myths, and stories across cultures. One of these archetypes is the wise woman. She is often shown as the crone, the witch, the healer, or the priestess. She lives outside the village, apart from others. People fear her, but they also secretly respect her. Why? Because she knows something others don't. She has access to truth. Women who live alone often step into this archetype without even realizing it. They stop chasing approval, they stop playing roles. And as they begin to trust themselves more, they tap into a deeper form of wisdom, the kind that doesn't come from books or schools, but from inner experience, from silence, from paying attention. But this power makes others uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't fit into the usual story of what a woman should be. The wise woman doesn't need permission. She doesn't need to be chosen. She doesn't need to explain herself. And in a world that still expects women to be soft, giving, and dependent, that kind of self-possession can look dangerous. Jung believed that society fears what it doesn't understand, and it often fears powerful women the most. That's why stories turned the wise woman into a witch. That's why she was cast out, labeled as strange or too intense. But underneath that fear is something much older, a recognition that this kind of woman doesn't play by the old rules. She isn't waiting to be saved. She has already saved herself. The woman who lives alone today is often carrying this same energy. She may not call herself a healer or a mystic. She may have a job, pay her bills, and live a quiet life. But inside, she is practicing the same kind of power, She listens to her instincts. She protects her peace. She chooses carefully who enters her space. She may not say much, but she sees everything. She doesn't need the spotlight. She doesn't need constant attention. But she holds a mirror up to the world, and that mirror can be hard to look into, because it shows us what it means to be truly whole. Not perfect, not without flaws, but whole without needing to be completed by someone else. So the next time we look at a woman living alone, maybe we should stop asking what's missing from her life. Maybe the better question is, what has she found that most people never even look for? Solitude isn't always peaceful. In fact, it can be one of the hardest things a person goes through. When a woman chooses to live alone, she also chooses to face something most people avoid: the shadow. In Jung's theory, the shadow is the part of ourselves we hide, our fears, anger, regrets, and desires. It's everything we were taught to push down in order to be accepted. But living alone means those parts of the self can no longer be ignored. In the silence, the shadow rises. There are no distractions, no constant noise, no one else to blame or lean on. And for many women, this can feel overwhelming at first. The loneliness can be sharp. Old memories can return. The voices of doubt grow louder. But here's the truth Jung wanted us to see. This discomfort is not a punishment. It's part of the transformation. The shadow isn't there to destroy you. It's there to make you whole. And when a woman learns to sit with it, to face what she fears without running away, she begins to change. She becomes stronger, not in a loud or aggressive way, but in a quiet, grounded way that can't be shaken from the outside. Loneliness, then, becomes something else. It's not emptiness. It's space. Space where healing can happen. Space where the real self can rise up, finally free from roles, pressure, or performance. Jung believed that real growth often comes through pain, but it's pain with a purpose. And for the woman living alone, that pain can lead to deep liberation. This woman no longer shapes herself around someone else's needs. She no longer has to dim her light or soften her edges to fit into someone else's story. Instead, she writes her own story, not out of anger or pride, but out of clarity. She knows who she is. She's met herself in the silence, and she's come out the other side. Jung didn't believe that love was impossible for someone like her. He believed that love, real love, could only happen after this kind of inner work. Because until you know yourself, until you've faced your shadow, you'll always bring your wounds into your relationships. But the woman who has done this work doesn't seek love from a place of fear. She doesn't need to be rescued or completed. She chooses love when it adds to her life, not because she's afraid to be alone. That is real power, and it terrifies a world that still clings to the idea that a woman's value depends on her being needed. But Jung saw something different. He saw a future where both men and women become whole within themselves, and then meet each other with open eyes, not illusions. A future where love isn't built on fear but on freedom, where connection isn't based on need but on truth. And in many ways, the woman who lives alone is already standing at the edge of that future. So what does it really mean when a woman chooses to live alone? It doesn't mean she's broken. It doesn't mean she's waiting. It doesn't mean she's failed at love or life or womanhood. What it often means is that she's chosen a harder path, one that asks her to go inward instead of outward, one that doesn't reward her with applause but with something far more valuable: clarity. Jung believed that most relationships are built on illusion, not because people are dishonest, but because they're afraid. Afraid to be seen fully, afraid to be alone, afraid to admit how much they rely on others to feel whole. But the woman who lives alone begins to face those fears. She doesn't escape them. She walks directly into them. And that makes her dangerous in the best possible way. Because when a woman stops needing approval, she becomes impossible to control. When she stops waiting to be chosen, she starts choosing herself. And that shift changes everything. This kind of woman isn't hard to love. She just won't accept the kind of love that asks her to shrink. She has already gone too far, learned too much, and seen too clearly. She has tasted freedom, not the kind that's loud and wild, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing who you are. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. Carl Jung never wrote about modern women, social media, or urban apartments filled with plants and books. But he understood the deeper truth behind solitude. He understood the storm that begins when someone chooses to stop performing and start becoming. And he understood that this path, while lonely at times, leads to something sacred. a self that is no longer afraid of the dark. So the next time you see a woman living alone, don't assume she's missing something. Don't reduce her to a stereotype. See her for what she is, someone who dared to face herself, someone who walked away from comfort to find truth, someone who may be more whole, more awake, and more alive than the world is ready to admit. And maybe the real question isn't why she's alone. Maybe the question is, what is she teaching the rest of us about being free?